Thereupon, when those beings there who made the aim and sense of their existence the destruction of these pearl-bearing beings, that is to say, who destroyed their existence only in order to procure that part of their common presence called pearl, merely for the gratification of their quite absurd egoism, found no more of these said pearl-bearing beings in the water area nearest to the continent Atlantis. They, that is, these professionals, then began to look for them in other water areas and gradually moved further and further away from their own continent. Once during these searches of theirs, owing to what are called Salyakuryapnian displacements, or as they say, prolonged storms, their rafts came unexpectedly to a place where there proved to be a great number of these pearl-bearing beings, and the place itself was extremely convenient for their destruction. These water areas where the destroyers of the pearl-bearing beings then chanced to come, and where these beings bred in large numbers, were just those water areas which surround the place then called Pearl Land, and now called Hindustan, or India. For the first days, the aforementioned terrestrial professionals of that time who had chanced to arrive there did nothing but gratify to the full their inclinations, which had already become inherent to their presences, in respect of the destruction of these one-brained beings of their planet. And it was only later, after they had also by chance found out that almost everything required for ordinary existence arose in abundance on the neighboring terra firma, that they decided never to return to Atlantis but to settle there for their permanent existence. A few of these destroyers of pearl-bearing beings then sailed to the continent Atlantis, and having exchanged their pearls for various articles which were still lacking in the new place, they returned, bringing with them their own families as well as the families of those who had remained. Later, several of these first settlers of this, for the beings then at that time, new country, visited their native land from time to time for the purpose of exchanging pearls for articles required by them there. And each time they took back with them a further number of beings, either their relatives or their kinsmen, or just the laborers indispensable to their extensive work. So, my boy, from that time on, that part also of the surface of the planet Earth became known to all the three-brained beings there under the name of Land of Beneficence. In this way, before the second great catastrophe to the planet Earth, many beings of the continent Atlantis already existed on this part of the continent Ashark also. And when the second catastrophe occurred to your planet, then many of the beings who chanced to be saved from the continent Atlantis, chiefly those who already had relatives and kinsmen in that Pearl Land, also gradually collected there. Owing, as always, to their fecundity, they gradually multiplied there and began to populate this part of the terra firma of their planet more and more. At first, they populated there in Pearl Land only two definite regions, namely the regions around the mouths of the two large rivers which flowed from the interior of Pearl Land into the large water space, just in those places near which many of the mentioned pearl-bearing beings bred. But when the population there greatly increased, they began to populate also the interior of that part of the continent Ashark. But nevertheless, their favorite regions continued to be the valleys of the two mentioned rivers. Well then, my boy, when I first arrived in Pearl Land, I decided to attain my aim there also by means of the Habat Vernoni which existed there, that is, through their religion. But it turned out that amongst the beings of this third group of the continent Ashark, there were at that time several peculiar Habat Bernonis, or religions, all based on different, quite independent, what are called religious teachings, having nothing in common with each other. In view of this, I first began seriously studying these religious teachings there, and having in the course of my studies constated that one of them, founded on the teaching of a genuine messenger of our common endless Creator, afterwards called Saint Buddha, had the most followers, I, on becoming acquainted with it, devoted most of my attention to its study. Before continuing to tell you about the three-brained beings breeding just on that part of the surface of the planet Earth, it is, I think, necessary to remark, even if briefly, that there existed and still exist, ever since the time when the practice of having peculiar being Habat Vernonis, or religions, began to arise and exist among your favorites, two basic kinds of religious teachings. One kind was invented by those three-brained beings there themselves, in whom for some reason or other there arises the functioning of a psyche proper to Hasnamusses, and the other kind of religious teaching is founded there upon those detailed instructions which have been preached, as it were, by genuine messengers from above, who indeed are from time to time sent by certain nearest helpers of our common Father for the purpose of aiding the three-brained beings of your planet in destroying in their presences the crystallized consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer. The religion which was then followed by most of the beings of the country Pearl Land, and to become acquainted with which I then devoted my attention, and about which I find it necessary to tell you a little, arose there in the following way. As I later learned, with the multiplication of the three-brained beings of that third group, many beings among them with the properties of Hasnamusses were formed into responsible beings, and when these latter began spreading ideas more maleficent than usual among the beings of that group, there was crystallized in the presences of the majority of the three-centered beings of the third group that special psychic property which, in its totality, already engendered a factor which greatly hindered the normal exchange of substances actualized by the most great common cosmic Trogo-Auto-Egocrat. Well, then, as soon as this lamentable result, also issuing from this planet, was noticed by certain most sacred individuals, it was sanctioned that a corresponding sacred individual should be sent there, specially to that group of beings, for the more or less tolerable regulation of their being existence, in accordance with the existence of the whole of that solar system. It was just then that the aforementioned sacred individual was sent to them, who, having been coated with the planetary body of a terrestrial being, was called, as I've said, Saint Buddha. The coating of the said sacred individual with a planetary body of a terrestrial three-brained being was actualized there several centuries before my first visit to the country Pearl Land. At this point in Beelzebub's tales, Hassan turned to him and said, "My dear grandfather, during your tales, you have already many times used the expression Hasnamus. I have until now understood only from the intonation of your voice and from the consonants of the word itself that by